Another week, boys, and another TWAB. This week at Bungie, we take a look at every grain in the Ability Sandbox. Hello and welcome to another Sandbox-focused TWAB. If you're new around these parts, you may be asking, what's a Sandbox? Well, it's complicated. It's split between the weapons you use, the armor you equip, the perks and mods that you hunt for, and the enemies you face. Let's be real, the Destiny Sandbox is broad. Last week, we focused on Weapons Sandbox and what changes are planned for December the 7th. This week, we're taking a pass on the abilities your Guardian possesses. Think supers, melees, grenades, class abilities. I highly recommend you grab a glass of water and maybe even a snack because we've got a pretty lengthy update for you to read. Now, before we dive into the details, it's customary to have a TWAB intro discussing what's going on in the realm of Bungie and Destiny. Let's keep this short and sweet, shall we? Our 30th anniversary is out on December the 7th, which just so happens to be 19 days from the publication of this blog article. In-game, there's still plenty to do between seasonal challenges, Trials of Osiris, the occasional Iron Banner, vendor reputation, god roll hunting, and more. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving here in the States, and many of us will be taking some time to rest up and spend time with the family. And as such, expect a very light TWAB next Wednesday. All right, it's sandbox time. Let's get to it. There are buffs, there are nerfs, there are tuning levers that we recently unlocked with back-end changes. There are clear separations between PvE and PvP and more. There's a lot going on here, so don't feel bad if you scratch your head wondering how these upcoming changes will feel. If you find anything a bit confusing, please sound off with the questions. We'll clarify as we can on our forums and social spaces. With all the preamble out of the way, I'll finally shut up and pass the mic over to the team, starting with the New Legends Rise. Hey all, Kevin Yanes here to give you a quick intro before I hand off to fellow designer Eric Smith and Mike Humboldt. A few TWABs ago, I gave a brief roadmap leading towards our 30th anniversary, the Witch Queen, and beyond. A new roadmap update will likely not happen for some time after this, as the team is heads down on more than a few initiatives. One of the initiatives you're going to hear about today is an adjustment to the ability regeneration as a whole, and a refocusing of Crucible gameplay on weapons. The team has touched almost every piece of ability content with this release, and I'm fairly convinced that this will be our biggest balance patch ever. Earlier this year, we heard overwhelming feedback that the Crucible has been largely dominated by ability usage. Players felt that abilities were firing off too frequently, with too much potency and too little investment. At its core, Destiny is a game about space magic, so any adjustments to our abilities must be made with care. We believe the changes we made will keep the heat of what makes Destiny abilities fun intact, while shaving down some of the excessive cases we've seen out there. I feel it's important to reinforce here that part of Destiny's strength is that it's a live game and we're able to iterate and improve the game as time goes on. This means that we're building new foundational systems like the one you'll read about today with that in mind. We're giving ourselves more balanced knobs to tune than we've ever had before, and we hope you'll start to see why that's so important as you read on. We hope the 30th anniversary shakes up the sandbox in new ways and gets you excited for even more changes coming in the Witch Queen. The team will likely go heads down for a bit as we still have a Solar and Arc to 3.0 alongside other insanely cool initiatives. The team takes player feedback seriously, and as Destiny players ourselves, we have an intrinsic fire to keep improving things for everyone. We hope what you've seen over the last year reinforces that this team is both about competitive balance and making incredible dope new shit. Okay, now I'm going to fade away into ether as Eric Smith takes us into what's coming next. Really good point, guys. Yes, the Sandbox team actually for the past year since Beyond Light has been on fire. Really, this has been the most jam-packed amount of updates we've gotten to our sandbox. Now, starting with the winds of change. Eric, in the 30th anniversary, we've changed the way ability cooldowns work. Up until now, cooldowns across individual ability types, grenade, melee, class, and super, have generally been identical between all abilities of the same type. For example, all the grenades in today's Destiny 2 share the same cooldown time, with the exception of the stasis grenades. This shared cooldown means that all grenades need to have roughly the same power output because they have the same time costs. For the 30th anniversary, we've made a change that allows us to tune the cooldown of each ability separately. This gives us a new knob to turn when balancing abilities that are too powerful or not powerful enough. Now that we have this new system in place, we've done a cooldown tuning pass of all the subclass abilities in the game, tuning each ability's cooldowns and their time against its power outputs. We've also tuned ability power outputs and assigned cooldown times accordingly. The best example of this might be the Flux Grenade. Take a look. So starting with the Flux Grenade, increase base cooldown from 82 seconds to 182 seconds. Holy hell! Increase attached detonation damage from 150 to 250? Oh my god, it's happening, fellas. We're getting one-hit sticky grenades back in PvP. Increased damage versus PvE combats by 15%. On top of the base damage increase, remove projectile tracking, added a small amount of aim assist, increased the throw speed by 117%. Good lord, that's a fastball. Now sticks to all surfaces. Interesting on that point. That's actually really good. I like that change. I don't know what to think about this, fellas. I've been through one-hit sticky grenade metas, okay? I've seen it. It was nasty and infuriating. As you can see, the flux grenades now has a very long cooldown, but it's a one-shot kill in PvP if you manage to land it. It also hits harder in PvE. As a reminder, the flux grenade is currently only available to Hunter Arc Striders. Now here's an example in the opposite direction, the firebolt grenades. Firebolt grenades reduce the base cooldown from 82 seconds to 64 seconds. Also reduce the damage per bolt from 90 to 65 and increase damage versus PvE combatants by 15%. The firebolt grenade has a low cooldown time, especially at tier 10 discipline, and it also has a low damage output. Guys, if I'm doing my math right, tier 10, would that put it at like 11-12 seconds for a grenade? Am I getting that right? These kinds of varied cooldowns and power outputs should make the game feel more dynamic and give more depth to build crafting. To make build crafting around cooldowns easier, you'll now be able to see the base cooldown time of your abilities when selecting them on a subclass screen. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Chain lightning gives the base cooldown, and this is going to vary. Now on the character screen, you'll see the actual cooldown time of your abilities as they're affected by your equipped ability and armor stats. So right here on your actual character, notice this will take into account your base cooldown and your tier of your strength for this instance. Now, a couple things to note about the cooldown times in the UI. The base cooldown time is actually the cooldown time at tier 3 of the relevant armor stat, strength, discipline, etc. This is because the system technically penalizes you for tanking your stats below tier 3, in which case your cooldown would be longer than the base. We are looking into updating this to be more intuitive in future releases. Cooldown times for class abilities are not currently displayed due to technical issues. We plan to fix this in a future release. So let me get this right. The base cooldown time is actually the cooldown time at tier 3 of the relevant armor stat, but you're penalized for tanking your stats below tier 3, in which case the cooldown would be longer than the base. So my question is, considering what it's saying right here, it's essentially saying that at tier 3, you're at base stats, but wouldn't base be tier 1, right? Or tier 0? I know they're gonna fix this in the future release. I'm just trying to understand what exactly is, and is this like a UI issue, or is it like a for real cooldown is literally longer when you are below tier 3? Now, I don't want to get too hung up on this, but moving on. We've been calling this the variable ability cooldown system, and we think it's the beginning of a big change for the Destiny 2 sandbox. It's a foundational change in preparation to move the light subclasses over to the Subclass 3.0 system that Stasis currently uses. For the 30th anniversary, we're using it to change the cooldown of nearly every ability in the game. Guys, y'all remember that podcast we covered earlier this year? And they were talking about it then, the dynamic cooldown system. This is a huge change, guys, because for the most part, Bungie has kept everything apples to apples or leveled across the playing field amongst all abilities, despite there being more lethal options in that same category. Take, for instance, Titans, right? Flashbang grenades. Are they really that lethal? I mean, yeah, they can blind the enemy, but they're not necessarily that lethal. So in my opinion, I always thought that those grenades that really weren't that lethal should have faster cooldowns. Now, one of our design goals this year was to reduce the amount of ability spam in the Crucible and put the focus back on gunplay. To this end, we've made ability cooldown times longer on average than they were before. We don't want the PvE experience to suffer for the sake of PvP balance though, so we try to compensate where possible. For example, we've increased all grenade damage versus PvE combatants by 15% or more. This should make grenades feel like bigger power moments than they do in today's game. Melee ability cooldowns haven't been increased quite as much as grenade cooldowns, and some of the less aggressive melee attacks have lower cooldowns than before. Class ability cooldowns have also generally increased, but the changes vary depending on which ability is equipped. We're excited to see how these changes feel once they've hit the live game, and we'll be monitoring and adjusting accordingly in future releases. I'll now pass the mic to Mike Humboldt to talk about big changes to super cooldowns. First up, guys, yes, class abilities are getting an increase there in its duration, most notably to probably combat hunters, but all of the classes really. It's interesting though that they're saying that they're trying to slow down the amount of abilities being spammed inside of Crucible, but in my opinion, you're gonna see more people specking out for abilities now. You give people one-hit stick grenades? Oh yeah, I'm gonna be using it all day, baby. Now into the fray. So from Mike here, since Destiny's launch in 2014, super energy gain has been almost entirely passive. Your intellect stat dictates how quickly your super regenerates, with a few other elements like orbs of power, armor and common weapon perks, and defeating targets as active sources. This system worked well for a long time, but has issues that have grown more obvious as the game has evolved and overall player skill, especially skill in evaluating how to play around their character build, has increased. Example, in high-stakes game modes like Trials of Osiris or Survival, where each life is precious, passive play becomes more common as players sit back and wait for the supers to close out a tied game. In general, we want the most efficient way to gain super energy to be actively engaging in combat. That doesn't mean you need to win every fight, but we want you to try. So to get us closer to the goal, we're making a big change to the system. Super regeneration will still have a passive component scaled by your intellect stats, but at a significantly reduced rate. On top of your passive regeneration, you will also gain super energy by dealing and taking damage to or from opponents. Interesting. So just being engaged. Hopefully, this does not mean you can get super energy by doing self-damage, right? Like if you have like a weapon with ricochet rounds, you just sit there by a wall and just shoot yourself. Here are a few key goals for this new system. In PvE, super uptime should be relatively unchanged from the live game, if not slightly higher. We are pretty happy with the frequency of supers in most PvE content and don't want to make big changes right now on that front. Everyone should get at least one super in a 6v6 match that goes to the score or time limit as long as they engage in regular combat. Expression of power through using your awesome space magic is a core part of what makes Destiny special, and we're not looking to change that. We think the cadence of supers in 6v6 modes is slightly too high, but we don't expect a dramatic change in super uptime from most players in playlists like Control or Iron Banner as a result of these changes. Now, supers should be less frequent in 3v3 modes than in the live game, where 2 supers per match is a fairly regular occurrence. These modes are about expression of players' skill. We want the skill to be primarily about team coordination, positioning, intelligent use of your abilities, and first and foremost, gunplay. While there is absolutely skill in outmaneuvering active supers or playing around super uptime, supers in general are purposely designed to be accessible power fantasies for all players, and that inherently creates asymmetry that we need to account for in more competitive play. Interesting right here, guys. Yeah, this is obviously why this change is being made. It's for trials. It's for 3v3. I don't really know if the super usage is really that out of hand. To be perfectly honest with you, it's nowhere near as bad as it was like Forsaken. Like Forsaken, dude, supers were really getting out of hand. I felt like entire matches were like mayhem games, and it can get like that at times inside of 6v6. Inside of trials though, passive play should not be rewarded. Strategic play, yes. Positioning, absolutely. But just sitting in the back of the map waiting for your super to come up, it's a strategy as old as Destiny. Now Bungie continues, primary weapon play should have a noticeable benefit in super energy regeneration. With this new system, we are scaling energy gains up and down granularly based on the source of the damage, both outgoing and incoming. Outgoing primary weapon damage has a significant higher return of super energy per damage point than any other type of damage. Interesting, guys. Again, per damage point, the damage you are putting into your enemy will contribute to your super, not just to kill. And the fact that they're actually outlining primary obviously means that Bungie wants us to use our primary weapons. It makes you wonder if there's like 2 different teams going at it. You've got 3 rounds, they got 3 rounds, but you got all your kills with special weapons in those 3 rounds, but they got all their kills with primary weapons. How much more super energy will they have? From Bungie's standpoint, it should be significant. Now, different supers should come online at different times in a given match, and your super of choice should have an impact on how quickly it regenerates. Oh my God. Are we about to have dynamic super regeneration here? To reiterate what we mentioned above, we've always lived in a world where nearly every super in the game shares the same cooldown, regardless of their efficacy in a given game mode. Now that we've made the foundational change to differentiate cooldowns per individual ability, we want to address the super o'clock issue in the Crucible, where 3 minutes into a match, 12 supers are simultaneously popped and chaos ensues. We also want to open up build crafting space where your super's cooldown time is an important element in your decision making beyond how high you want your intellect stat to be. To that end, we separated supers into cooldown tiers that affect both the passive regeneration rate as well as the damage-based regeneration rate. This tiering was primarily influenced by each super's kill potential, where most one-off supers are unlikely to wipe a team or a room of combatants, but a long-lasting roaming super can and should have a trade-off as a result. We've also taken into account the general potency of subclass kits where possible. For example, later on we'll discuss Shadow Dive and changes we're making which impact impact how effective the Revenant Hunter is in the neutral game, causing us to shift some of the potency to the super uptime as a result. It's also important to stress that this is the first iteration of this system, where any given super will fall into the recharge rate tiers will change over time as we continue tuning. These are the super regeneration rate tiers that we're launching with on December the 7th. Starting with tier 5, fastest regeneration, Well of Radiance. Tier 4, Blade Barrage, Silence and Squall. Okay, so this is actually legitimately which supers are the fastest. Tier 3 includes Shadow Shot, Burning Maul, Arc Staff, Nova Bomb, Thunder Crash. Wow. Okay, Thunder Crash. I mean, I know it's like a one-hit super, but still, you can get multi-kills with it. But I see where they're coming from. And Burning Maw as well, look at that. Tier 2, Golden Gun, Chaos Reach, Nova Warp, Storm Trance, Daybreak, and Sentinel Shield. And then Tier 1, these are the slowest regenerating supers. You have Spectral Blades, Fist of Havoc, Hammer Soul, Glacial Quake, and Winter's Wrath. Dude, they put Glacial Quake on here? That super is terrible. All right, I think everything else here is pretty normal, right? Interesting that Well of Radiance is the fastest. Dude, watch everybody rock Well of Radiance in Trials now. Now, as Kevin and Eric mentioned, this sets us up for the future as we move towards the Subclass 3.0 system. As an example, for the 30th anniversary, things like the Deadfall and Mobius Quiver variants of Shadow Shot will share the same cooldown tier, but with a Void 3.0 launch in February, they could exist in different tiers based on their potency. By that same token, Word of Dawn, which is currently tied to the Sentinel Shield cooldown, will move into the tier 5 group as a standalone super with Void 3.0. Interesting. So some of these supers, you cannot separate them, right? So they have Sentinel Shield as tier 2 because you can go between Sentinel Shield or the bubble. But when Void 3.0 occurs and there is a separation of the super where you can only do a bubble and not tied to the Sentinel Shield, then Word of Dawn will actually have the same cooldown as Well of Radiance, being that tier 5 super fast cooldown. All right, fellas, how are we feeling about this, huh? This is wild, man. I've never seen this. I've been covering a lot of TWABs and a lot of sandbox updates. This is wild. Dynamic cooldowns, only something we've dreamed of. Now taking it down a notch. So from Mike here, let's talk about non-super abilities for a moment. In the May 27th, 2021 TWAB, Kevin shared our foundational pillars for the role we want abilities to play in PvP combat sandbox. As a quick refresher, this is where we want to be. Weapons are the primary way players engage with combat. Non-super abilities accentuate or augment the combat, but should rarely solve an encounter by themselves. Abilities have clear strengths, weaknesses, and counterplay. Build crafting is rewarding within the moment-to-moment combat loop of Destiny. We're not there yet. In general, ability uptime in the Crucible is too high for the current potency, and it's difficult to understand when an opponent will regain an ability after using it. Now, some of that uptime comes from the passive cooldowns, but many of our outliers also come from elements of the build crafting system that have previously been unified in ability energy returns between PvE and PvP. With the 30th anniversary, we've taken a pass at significant number of these elements. Across subclass perks, armor mods, and exotic armor pieces, we have tuned PvP energy regeneration separately from their base PvE values, which are not changing. You know, that again is something that's incredible. It's almost like the shift into Beyond Light with some sort of background engine change that is allowing Bungie here to dynamically change our subclasses individually and between two different sandboxes, both PvE and PvP. Fellas, are you aroused yet? Now, per our pillars, we want build crafting to be rewarding, but in its current state, the combinatorial nature of these perks and items leads to an unsustainable ability energy economy that diminishes weapon play in PvP. For this tuning pass, we focus primarily on items that feed into self-perpetuating loops of ability energy gains. Here's a brief list of the affected items. So starting with subclass neutral game perks. These perks have had their ability energy regeneration reduced by roughly 50% in PvP. We've targeted perks that can either activate out of combat with a single button press, or those that were returning amounts of ability energy that were significantly out of band. So starting with Whisper Shards, Stasis Fragment, Arc Web, Stormcallers, Rising Storm, Stormcallers, Ionic Traces, Stormcallers, Electrostatic Surge, Stormcallers, Jesus, Stormcallers. Y'all getting slapped. Aftershocks, Striker, Inertia Override, Striker, Benevolent Dawn, Dawnblade, Practice Makes Perfect, Gunslinger, Dark Matter, Voidwalker. All right, so these were abilities, guys, that could feed into themselves, especially things like Ionic Traces. That's why Stormcaller, as you see there, really got hit. They're trying to slow things down, right? AKA put more focus into weapon play versus abilities. We'll see how it pans out. Moving on to subclass and super perks. These perks scale down energy returns as you get kills in your super. That is, the first kill while in super returns more super energy than the third kill. These perks often result in supers being able to roam the map for much longer than is healthy for the game, and mean that a victim can frequently die to an active super, respawn on the other side of the map, and be killed killed by the same super again. We've rescaled this energy refund decay more aggressively in PvP so that the minimum energy refund is reached roughly twice as quickly. No change has been made to the refund decay against PvE combatants. The two supers, Everlasting Fire on Dawnblade Warlock and Trample on Striker Titan. Trample, by the way, is a bottom tree striker class ability where destroying enemies with Fist of Havoc will extend the super. Similar to Warlock with Everlasting Fire, where killing an enemy with Daybreak extends its duration. Now the rescaling here of the energy refund decays more aggressively in PvP. But notice they did point out it does not affect PvE. So when you look at this, guys, it's kind of a double whammy nerf. Take Trample, bottom tree striker Titan. Dude, this is already going to be a tier 1 in terms of super regeneration, meaning it's going to have one of the slowest regeneration speeds, but it's simultaneously going to have aggressively more decay in super regeneration on kills. So again, you're looking at nerfs here that are pretty substantial on two different fronts. Now, exotic armor. Each exotic below had a custom tuning pass focused on their ability energy return in PvP. Starting with Frosty's, no longer stacks multiplicatively in PvP with other regeneration buffs, is now an additive scaler. No change in PvE. Heart of Inmost Light. Ability energy regeneration scalers reduced by 50% in PvP. Reworked so activating multiple abilities will now reliably result in multiple empowered stacks. The stacking behavior was previously bugged, but this seemed like a good opportunity to promote it to a feature. Yeah, actually it was bugged. You had to do, what was it, barricade, then melee, then grenade, right? Now, controversial hold. Duration of the grenade regeneration buff is no longer random between 1 and 4 seconds, and is now a fixed duration of 1.75 seconds. Reduce grenade energy regeneration scaler by 50% in PvP. The previous average duration due to waiting was 1.71 seconds, with a 1 second duration being most common. So this should improve the exotic's consistency across the game with lower return in PvP. Now, Doomfang Pauldrons. Reduce super energy gain on activation when an opposing player is killed by a void melee by 50%. No change in PvE. Yeah, Doomfang was actually really good if you just wanted to get your super up really fast, just get a melee off, but I used it a lot more in PvE. Now, Shinobu's Vow. Reduce grenade energy gain on hit versus player by 66%. No change in PvE. Now, Crown of Tempest. Grenade, melee, and super energy regeneration scalar buff, and its duration reduced from 7 seconds to now 4 seconds in PvP. No change in PvE. The Stack. Reduce class ability energy refund on shield break by 50% in PvP. No change in PvE. All right, so we got some decent nerfs here. Now, armor mods. In general, we've reduced energy returns from these mods by roughly 50% in PvP, depending on the number of copies of the mods that you have slotted, including melee kickstart, grenade kickstart, utility kickstart, perpetuation, bolster and detonation, focus and strike, bomber, outreach, dynamo, distribution, momentum transfer, and impact induction. Pretty much every mod that affects ability cooldown just got hit. No lie, those kickstart mods, really good. This is a big foundational shift for us, and we expect to do a lot of tuning as time goes on. So as always, we'll be on the lookout for how things are feeling across the game, and we'll adjust accordingly. Now, I'll throw it back over to Eric for some spicy details on more ability tuning changes you can expect with the 30th anniversary. So from Eric, dang, this is long. That's what she said. In case you haven't caught on yet, the list of ability changes we're making in 30th anniversary is massive. We've touched nearly every ability in the game in some small way. We won't go over the full patch notes because it's mind-numbingly long, but let's take a look at some of the more provocative balance changes. So starting with Stasis Crystals. Stasis Crystals do a lot. On top of freezing players when they're created, they also block line of sight, block movement, and act as explosive barrels. It's all a bit too much for PvP. With this release, Stasis Crystals will now slow players instead of freezing them, and they'll do much less damage to players when they detonate. Interesting. As far as PvE is concerned, Stasis Crystals will still freeze combatants, and we've increased Stasis Crystal detonation damage versus PvE combatants. Look at the numbers. It was almost always better to shoot directly at a combatant instead of at a crystal near a combatant. This change should help crystals better live out their explosive barrel dreams. So starting with Stasis Crystals, while forming, Stasis Crystals now slow nearby players instead of freezing them. They still freeze PvE combatants while forming. Also increase slow and freeze radius while forming from 1.75 meters to now 2.6 meters. Reduce crystal detonation damage versus players by 55%. Increase crystal detonation damage versus PvE combatants by 60%. Increase crystal detonation radius from 6 meters to now 8 meters. Interesting. So the radius is actually getting a buff, but again, it's just going to be slowed. And you also got a reduction there in crystal damage, or its detonation damage against players, but an increase there against PvE combatants. Okay, moving on to the Hunter. Dodge. In order to meet our goal of less ability spam in the Crucible, we're reducing how often hunters can dodge. Oh, it's finally happening. Yes, you dodgy bastards. Gambler's Dodge is getting hit the hardest here because it can completely circumvent melee ability cooldown times. It also completely changes the hunter silhouette in PvP, making it very powerful. In addition, hunter dodges will no longer break projectile tracking, meaning it's less of a get out of jail free card when a tracking rocket or another slow moving projectile is flying towards you. So the hunter dodge no longer breaks projectile tracking. Marksman dodge, tier 10 mobility cooldown increase from 11 seconds to 14 seconds. Base cooldown unchanged at 29 seconds. Gambler's dodge, tier 10 mobility cooldown increase from 11 seconds to 18 seconds. Base cooldown duration from 29 seconds to 38 seconds. Oh, all right, so I mean, yeah, it's a nerf, but not hard enough, Bungie. Yo, I know we got some mad hunters in here right now. Now moving on to the Revenant. You guessed it. The stasis crystal changes detailed earlier means that the Hunter Revenant Shadow Dive will now almost never kill a full health Guardian. Shadow Dive may still kill if the hunter is using Whisper of Fissures, Touch of Winter, and if the target is in the very center of all 6 crystals. But that has been incredibly rare in our playtesting. I think we can all agree that Shadow Dive was too powerful. We tried a number of fixes over the past few releases, but the truth is that as long as stasis crystals froze players and Shadow Dive shattered players, it was going to be too good. But it's not all rain clouds and puddles for Shadow Dive hunters. The increase in stasis crystal damage versus PvE combatants makes Shadow Dive a great choice in PvE. That's hilarious, Bungie. I can't wait to see my Shadow Dive hunters go into PvE. There you go, fellas. You can live out your fantasy there. On top of that, we're also increasing Shadow Dive damage versus frozen combatants by 100%. Have fun melting frozen monsters. Well, looky there, fellas. Honestly, such a good trade-off. Now, Shadow Dive, much less lethal versus players due to stasis crystal changes. Much more lethal versus combatants due to stasis crystal changes. Increased shatter damage versus frozen PvE combatants by 100%. Grim Harvest aspect. Increased fragment slots from 2 to now 3. Oh, looky there. Another slot. Meta. Now, Top Tree Arc Strike. Now, this change is to the combination blow melee and was made possible by our variable ability cooldown system. Previously, Top Tree Arc Striders were basically required to use Gambler's Dodge with its tree. We hope this change will make this ability viable even if you're using Marksman's Dodge. So starting with combination blow, reduce base cooldown's duration from 96 seconds to now 15 seconds. Wow. It's a hell of a reduction. Bottom Tree Night Stalker. The Vantage and Smoke melee has low damage output but high utility. Our data shows that this subclass tree is struggling in PvP, so we decided to increase how often Pathfinder's hunters can go invisible. Vantage and Smoke melee. Reduce base cooldown from 96 seconds to 75 seconds. Yay. True story, guys. The hardest I have ever raged was against a hunter back inside of Destiny 1 going invisible with universal remotes. Moving on to Titan. Shoulder charges. In our effort to put the emphasis back on gunplay in the Crucible, we've decided to reduce the number of abilities that can one-shot a full health Guardian. As such, the Titan's 3 shoulder charges are no longer one-shot abilities in PvP. What is this, year 1? To balance this out, we've made the shoulder charge quicker to activate, easier to hit with, and travel further. We've also increased their damage in PvE. In our experience, they're still powerful in PvP in combination with short-range weapons and when used as a movement tool. We want to curb shoulder charges potency now that we tuned down shotguns as their current counter. We'll be monitoring the data and feedback and adjusting accordingly. No lie, this kind of hurts to read, but let's look at the specs. All shoulder charges no longer will one-shot players. Sprint activation time has been reduced though from 1.5 seconds to 1.25, and the range has been increased from 5.5 meters to 6.8 meters. The targeting cone width increased by 10%, also increased damage versus PvE combatants by 25%. Yeah, that's great and all on that PvE damage, but Bungie, come on, let us 1-2 punch combo with shoulder charge again, and then we can talk. Seismic Strike, which is the arc shoulder charge. Reduce AoE damage from 90 to 40, now blinds enemies in the area on a hit. Increase base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90 seconds. Now the Shield Bash, the Void shoulder charge. Reduce AoE damage from 90 to 40, increase base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90. Most likely it was still suppressed though, guys. Now the Hammer Strike, which is the Solar shoulder charge. Reduce direct impact damage from 170 to 120, increase base cooldown from 82 seconds to 90 seconds. Overall, I think the thing I'm most excited about there is actually the range change and of course the activation. I use shoulder charge as a means of movement back in D1 the most, and a lot of people would use shoulder charge to just gain momentum into their Titan skating, but that extra almost 1.5 meters in combination to a quarter second being trimmed off, that's kind of nice. That makes a difference in gunfights, fellas. Now the Barricade. Even with the rally barricade changes that we made in Season the Loss, using this ability during a firefight is still a risky proposition. We spaced out the cooldowns of the 2 barricades to make the choice slightly more interesting. So the Tower Barricade increased base cooldown duration from 37 seconds to now 40 seconds. The Rally Barricade reduced base cooldown duration from 37 seconds to 32 seconds. lines. Maybe people will start using Rally Barricade. I personally have been using it more here recently due to the range benefits, but inside of trials, yeah, I use Tower Barricade. Now, the Behemoth. We agree with the general community feedback that the Behemoth could use some love in PvE. We're hoping these changes to Diamond Lance makes this aspect a top tier PvE pick. Shiver Strike is getting a big damage buff during the Glacial Quake Super. The Whisper of Chains fragment buff here is also very spicy and should help the Behemoth's survivability in pinnacle PvE activities. Whisper of Chains can be used by all stasis subclasses, but making crystals is kind of the Behemoth's thing, so we're listing it here. So starting with Diamond Lance, increase fragment slots from 1 to 3. Now spawns a Diamond Lance upon killing a PvE combatant with a stasis weapon, killing 3 players with stasis weapons in a single life, killing an enemy with a stasis ability, shattering an enemy. All right, so wait, just killing a PvE combatant with a stasis weapon will spawn a Diamond Lance? I wonder if Headstone will actually dip into this. Now, Shiver Strike. Increase Shiver Strike damage while in Glacial Quake by 50%. Look at that. Meta! Whisper of Chains. Increase damage resistance versus PvE combatants from 25% to now 40%. Yeah, I actually crutch on chains a bunch. It's quite nice in PvE, fellas, especially Grandmasters. Now, Bottom Tree Striker. This class is absolutely dominating PvP this season, so we're tuning it down a notch. The changes we made to Fist of Havoc and Season of the Lost help Top Tree as intended, but they also turn Bottom Tree into a monster. On top of that, the stasis nerfs and other changes we made over the past few releases created a power vacuum that Striker Bot filled with extreme prejudice. We hope these changes put Striker Bot back into the pack instead of towering high above everything else. So Knockout. Melee lunge range and melee damage bonus now deactivate after a melee kill. Trample. Super energy gain from Fist of Havoc light attack now decays to a minimum amount over 3 PvP kills, down from 7. Frontal Assault melee. Increase base cooldown from 82 seconds to 106 seconds. Fist of Havoc. Heavy slam radius reduced from 8 meters to now 6 meters. Bottom tree only. All right, well, at least that's bottom tree only. But still, pretty significant nerfs, man. Nobody's safe today, dude. Warlocks. Uncharged melee. Warlocks have been losing slap fights for too long. Yes, up until now, Warlocks haven't been able to melee back to back as quickly as Titans and Hunters. No more. With the 30th anniversary, Warlocks will be able to melee just as quickly as Titans and Hunters. We're also removing the 1 meter range extension Warlocks receive to compensate. We still think the idea of each class having unique qualities to their melee is interesting, but we want to do it in a way that won't cause one class to consistently lose slap fights, maybe someday in the future. So the uncharged melee, reduced melee range from 5.5 meters to now 4.5 meters, now matches Hunters and Titans. Reduced suppression time after melee, can now melee back to back at the same speed as Hunter and Titan. Honestly, I find that the Warlock melee overall is just more consistent. You know, just that palm, throwing that palm out there. It's much easier than a knife or a fist. You're just palming people. And now that you're gonna have a faster melee, I don't want to hear any Warlocks complaining, because every time a Warlock loses a melee fight, they're like, oh, it's because my melee speed. Now, Middle Tree Voidwalkers. In our effort to do away with one-shot abilities that are frustrating to be hit by, Handheld Supernova is also getting the shoulder charge treatment. That's right, Handheld Supernova will no longer one-shot in PvP. To compensate, it now travels further and pushes enemies back. We also increased the damage of Handheld Supernova and Nova Warp versus champions and bosses combatants. We had increased their damage in Season of the Lost, but it felt like they could use some more juice. So Handheld Supernova reduced damage versus players, now deals 150 damage max. Increased damage versus champions and bosses by 30%. Increased projectile range from 12 meters to 14 meters. Okay, so it actually got a bump there in range. Now pushes targets away from the Warlock on detonation. Oh, well, okay. That's not all bad. You can use it as a cleanup afterwards, right? Like, or do it, detonate, push the enemy away, throw the projectile further, and then clean up with like an SMG or something. Now, the Nova Warp Super itself increased damage versus champion and bosses by 30%. Another buff. Now, if you're concerned right here, guys, about Handheld Supernova and this stuff, understand what Bungie's doing. They're nerfing it now to then buff it with Void 3.0. So I actually think we're going to have one-hit Handheld Supernovas yet again, but it's going to require probably a fragment and an aspect. Now, Shadebinder. We feel the Shadebinder is in a pretty good place with a couple of exceptions. One, Winter's Wrath is still the best super for shutting down other supers, and it's not even close. Winter's Wrath must now freeze and shatter other supers twice to kill them. As a general rule, roaming supers shouldn't be able to one-shot other supers. Two, the Penumbral Blast melee is too difficult to land against PvE combatants. When we made the ability harder to land in PvP, it had a negative effect on the PvE experience. We've increased the proximity detonation radius against PvE combatants to make it easier to land. Now, all 3 stasis grenades now have different cooldown times. So we made a change to the Bleak Watcher to avoid a situation where it was always best to use the grenade with the shortest cooldown time. This results in an overall cooldown increase for Bleak Watcher, which fits its incredibly high power outputs. So starting with Winter's Wrath, reduce shatter pulse damage versus enemy supers, must now generally freeze and shatter all supers twice to eliminate. Penumbral Blast, increase proximity detonation radius versus PvE combatants by 100%. And Bleak Watcher, while Bleak Watcher is equipped, all stasis uses grenades charged at Glacier Grenades rate. So they're gonna actually just lock it to the rate of most likely the longest cooldown. Now that's all for now, folks. Eric? Okay, I think we've covered the big stuff. There are a bunch of other small changes coming in the 30th anniversary, but we will cover everything else in the official patch notes. As you can see, the team has been hard at work adjusting the sandbox globally. We hope the picture we're painting here reinforces the statements we've made in the past. The sandbox is going to evolve alongside the game as we hit year 5 and beyond. This statement will become even more true with new and exciting changes coming with Subclass 3.0 experience. Stay tuned for the patch notes when the 30th anniversary goes live on December the 7th. Whew! Fellas, that was a lot. I'm talking a big boy TWAB. What it really boils down to, some buffs, some nerfs, and actually a lot of buffs to PvE. Most of the nerfs that I saw were all gauged at PvP. We knew this was coming when Kevin mentioned earlier this year about dynamic cooldowns, and we suspected that the abilities that had a lot of lethality would have increased ability cooldowns. My only issue I have with all of this, and don't get me wrong guys, I'm excited about these changes, but you don't want to lose class identity. You know, when you think of a Titan, you think of a punchy boy Titan. When you think of a hunter, you think of some sneaky boy hunter. I'm fine with all of these changes, and again, it's going to require us to go in and test them and just see. But I know like Bungie wants to get to where gunplay is the sole focus. I just hope we don't lose out on class identity, because that to me is what makes Destiny special. Now, as a final note here from DMG, did you make it to the end? The long TWAB is long. No, it takes a lot of work on the part of numerous teams to get a TWAB out the door. Our friends on the Sandbox team wrote the bulk of this update, and we can't thank them enough for their efforts, not only in developing the game, but taking time to run through goals and keep players informed. Between the dev team, the VizD team, localization teams, editorial teams, player support teams, Bungie.net team, Bungie Foundation team, and countless other teams and individuals who have helped us ship TWABs in the past, it's still crazy to me that we ship these nearly every single week of a given year. They're not all mega TWABs like today, but they still take a bit of work to get out the door as we continue to serve the community and provide transparency into our studio and daily lives. While I know I'm a week early for Thanksgiving, I'm thankful for every single one of them. Much love, and see you next week for a short and sweet TWAB. Until December 7th, I'll be dreaming of those sandbox changes. All I can think about is jumping on an Arc Hunter and equipping flux grenades. Bet you can't stick it. Cheers, DMG. All right, guys, that's your TWAB, fellas. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are you excited about these changes that are coming up? Again, this is not all of them. They made it apparent this is not all the changes, meaning we really won't know everything that's going to be hitting our other subclasses until the day of the 30th anniversary event. I would assume, though, there will be a lot of parallels between other subclasses and what you saw here. For instance, one-hit sticky grenades on Arc Striders, being able to one-hit stick and kill. Potentially, that will be the case with, say, magnetic grenades on Sentinels and other sticky grenades on other classes. We'll see, though. Regardless, this is looking to be a major update coming this December, and I can't wait to tackle it with you. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.